Okay, let's see if I can do this. Let's see. Hi, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good, that worked so well. This is my first live, so I'm glad we got it on the first try.
Yeah, no, I'm glad that we did too. It's funny because the first time that I ever did this was about a year ago, and it was such a ridiculous disaster.
Oh, really?
It was like halfway through I couldn't join, so finally like halfway through we just had to do split screen. It was a mess. So
Oh
I'm
God. Well, I made my sister practice with me earlier today, so.
so cute. That's so cute. Yeah, and so I'm because I've done them myself and I've done them like being hosted by somebody like yourself. But I've never done the hosting, and so I'm doing that for the first time tomorrow. And so
Oh.
we're done today. I'll have to get all of the tips and tricks from you.
Well, I'll be sure to tune in tomorrow too.
Yeah,
Well, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it. So, are you joining from Austin or where are you based?
I'm actually based in right outside of Dallas, Texas. And
Okay,
so
because you teach at TCU, is that right?
that's right.
Okay,
Yeah, I was in
awesome.
Austin for a meeting last week, and so it was a little bit of a mess, but it was a lot of fun.
Oh, well, awesome. Yeah, I'm from Austin, but I'm currently in LA staying at my sister's place. So, got a
Fun,
little setup here, and I'm
awesome.
so happy to have you joining me.
Thank you.
I really appreciate it. So I think I mentioned when I reached out to you that when I posted my review of your book, I had so many people reach out to me and DM me and post comments just saying that they were so shocked by some of the things that I mentioned because I posted like, obviously saying this book is amazing. I happen to have it right here. Everyone go buy it. It's amazing. But yeah, I posted the review with my key takeaways, and a lot of people are just really surprised by some of the research points that I mentioned. And so I'd love for you to just kind of start us off by giving us some background on you, what you do, and why you decided to write this book.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm a research psychologist, and that's just simply to say that I'm an experimental researcher, so I don't like, I'm not like a clinician. And I've spent most of my career studying women, health, and relationships. And so, I've spent a lot of time studying why women are attracted to some women or to some partners and not others, and like what are the different factors that influence women's sexual decision making. I'd published papers looking at the effects of women's sex hormones on motivation, and then also their mating psychology. But I didn't really spend a whole lot of time thinking about the birth control pill until I went off of the birth control pill. And then I went off of it, and about 3 months post time, time I went off, I started to feel awake. Like that's the only way I can describe it. I felt like I woke up. I felt like, and I describe it this way in the book, I still haven't come up with a better way to explain it than to say that it felt like I was in sort of a black and white line drawing, and that like when I went off the pill, I felt like I was like coming into like full 3D color reality. And
Yeah.
and so I started exercising again. I was downloading new music for the first time in years. I started cooking. I was like noticing attractive men. I was wanting to have sex more. I just felt like I woke up. And so I was like, I wonder, whether there's some sort of reason for this that has to do with my birth control pills. And when I started to dig into the literature, I learned that, of course, the birth control pill had, something to do with the way that I was feeling, and going off of it changed the way that I felt. I mean, it's funny because, I had studied and done research looking at the really potent effects that women's sex hormones have on women's motivational states. So things like who they're attracted to, their interest in sex, their feelings of vibrancy in life, And I'd studied all of this stuff, but I never connected the dots with my pill.
Yeah.
And so then, then when I was like looking at the literature and the research literature and seeing what was out there, it was really shocking to me just how much information is out there about the way that the birth control pill influences the brain, and then just like the way that women think and feel and behave, but that most women have no idea exists. I mean,
Yeah. I
no,
certainly didn't.
yeah, I mean, it's like it's like our doctors will tell us about the, risk of thrombosis or the risk of stroke. So we hear about those kinds of things. And every once in a while, we'll have a doctor who's got enough presence of mind to talk to us about things like sexual side effects and effects on mood. But those sorts of side effects are oftentimes, mentioned sort of, as a there's a chance that it might affect your mood, but that's doesn't really tell us a whole lot. And
Right.
yeah, so I wrote the book because I thought it was really important that women learn, just the range of effects that are possible on hormonal birth control. So that way, each one of us can decide for ourselves whether or not hormonal birth control makes sense for ourselves. And also, so that way we know what to look out for. I think
Right.
that a lot of us, we go on it and we just feel like we're cuckoo nuts. We
Yep.
don't understand, why, all of a sudden I am finding that I'm forgetting things, or I am not really feeling like going to the gym anymore. And we, we beat ourselves up over all of this and not really recognizing that some of these types of patterns are things that the research literature actually finds are related to birth control pill use.
Yeah. Yeah, and one of the things that I actually liked most about your book, I mean, to be honest, when I picked it up, I kind of thought I was kind of scared to read it because I thought, oh, I'm just gonna like feel like I can never take birth control again, and it's just gonna like scare me off of birth control completely. But like that's not what you set out to do with this book. Like you weren't trying to say you're by no means anti-birth control, and I fully love the fact that with this book you weren't trying to prescribe like a one size fits all, anything for any woman. You're just saying here's the research, this is everything I know. Now go make the best decision for yourself, which I think is amazing.
Thank you. Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, it's like the birth control pill has been absolutely wonderful in terms of, being a real tool of women's liberation, and played a really important role in terms of our ability to, get the kind of educational attainment we want and career achievement that we want without worrying about getting pregnant. And for a lot of us, it's the best thing we've got. We
Right.
don't have a lot of great birth control options. And so I think that, with everything that I know now, even I can make a case for the birth control pill being the best option that's available
Right.
in some cases, because for some women it is. And so really
Right.
about, yeah, me, Sarah Hill, like telling you, because you know what's best for you. You are an expert on you. I can be an expert for you on psychology and hormones and the birth control pill and its psychological effects, and tell you about those, but it's certainly not my, intention to tell anybody what they should or should not be doing with their body or their brain.
Yeah. Well, and just given the amount of discussion that my review provoked, like with my followers, and even people that weren't following me that somehow found it, it's just clear to me that there needs to be a lot more visibility and discussion on this topic because clearly, I picked up your book because I felt like I needed to educate myself better on what my options were and what would work best for me. And given the response, a lot of people felt that same way. And one of my biggest takeaways from your book is the fact that hormones affect everything, not just, the targeted effects, which are likely, clearer skin and or preventing conception or whatever other reasons women take birth control. And you kind of touched on this briefly when we first started chatting, but you mentioned that your hormones can affect who you're actually attracted to. And, if I meet a guy that I find really attractive while I'm on the pill and then I go off it for whatever reason, I may not be as attracted to him. So can you talk to me a little bit about that and what the reasons are for that?
Yeah, so there's been research now for about 20 years showing that women's sex hormones play an important role in terms of guiding who women are physically and like sexually attracted to. And there's, been research demonstrating that, especially at times in a woman's cycle when estrogen is high, that this tends to increase the preference that women have for cues that are associated with like testosterone presence in men. So we know
Okay.
that when estrogen is high across the cycle among naturally cycling women, so women who are not on birth control, what you see is when estrogen levels are high and conception is possible, that women tend to express a greater interest and preference in cues to masculinity in men. So having a masculinized face, which is something that's characterized by a wider lower jaw, deeper set eyes, deeper voice, sort of broader shoulders. These are some of the, like somebody who's socially dominant. These are all cues like behavioral and physical that are associated with testosterone presence. And we know from this research that's been going on now for, like I said, it's about 20 years now that they've been finding these results, that when estrogen is high, women tend to express a greater preference for these kinds of qualities. And so it was very recently that researchers like put two and two together, just like I did with my birth control pill use, where they said, well, wait a minute. You know, if estrogen increases women's preference for cues associated with testosterone, and when women are on hormonal birth control, their estrogen levels are kept really low, might we predict that women who are on hormonal birth control, that they might exhibit a lesser preference for testosterone markers in their partners? And so the researchers have gone and examined this issue, and that's exactly what they find, is that women who choose their partners when they're on hormonal birth control actually choose as partners men with somewhat less masculine male faces and voices than do women who are naturally cycling. And what's interesting about this, it's not like these huge differences, right? So like, not, you go from like wanting like super manly man to, the person who got all their lunch money, lunch money stolen and thrown in the locker. Although usually the guy who got his lunch money stolen like ends up being a really good partner, isn't
Yeah,
it?
the guy you actually want to marry.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, the guy who threw him into the locker is usually an asshole.
Yeah, most likely.
But they find that women who choose their partners on hormonal birth control, they are sort of zeroing in on different qualities, and that like cues to testosterone aren't as present or prevalent in these women compared to the other ones. And they also find that the pill takers prefer male faces that are less masculinized. And so all of this is, suggests that, yeah, your birth control pills could potentially influence who you're attracted to.
So fascinating.
Totally. It's like you never think like, whenever you think about a medication and just the idea that, side effects include, whatever, stroke or blah, also altered partner preferences, like the idea of reading that on a side of a medication label is crazy.
Well, and it wouldn't even fit. I mean, I feel like all the things I've heard about, things that birth control pills or IUDs and whatnot can affect, like that is never something that a doctor has ever said anything to me about. Really, everything in your book was something that like felt like my doctor should have told me and never has. So
Right. Yeah, and
very opening.
with a lot of it, it's like most physicians are concerned with what we consider like quote unquote clinically relevant variables. And
Mm-hmm.
so something that's clinically relevant is something that's going to like make you sick and in the hospital, right?
Okay.
I think that that the focus of research in medicine has been on, these types of outcomes, and for good reason. I mean, it's like we all want our medication that we're taking to be safe, but
Right.
I think that, especially the more we understand about the brain and just how influenced the brain is by things like hormones or things like neurotransmitters or even things like inflammatory factors. One of the study in my lab is the effects of immune functioning, so the release of inflammation, and how that influences the way that we think, feel, and experience the world and our health and the signaling by our immune system and all of these things. They play a really important role in how we think, feel, and behave. And
Yeah.
the idea that our bodies sort of operate independently from our brain and from the way that we feel and the way that we experience the world and behave, that's old school thinking. That's like Cartesian mind body split stuff. And it's like the more sophisticated that we get in terms of understanding just how integrated the mind body system is, the more, it really becomes necessary that we start to appreciate and investigate and inform people about the effects of different types of medications that they might be on their psychological functioning.
Yeah. Okay, so one thing I'm dying to ask you, and one thing I think I told you I was posted a little question box and have been asking for questions from my followers. So one thing that a number of people asked is, where are we on male birth control? Is that going to be a thing ever? I remember reading study or like an article a while back about some trials that were being done for a potential option for male birth control, and they ended up shutting it down in like later phases of the trial because like some men experienced like a little bit of depression. It's like, oh, boo-hoo, like if only you'd known what we've been through.
Right. Yeah. So I've got kind of two answers to this. So one is, yes, absolutely, it would be amazing to have male birth control, and like what, and I actually think that there's some reasons for it that I'll touch back to in just a moment. But yes, what you're referring to is there was a clinical trial that was done, and they started a new one about a year ago,
Okay.
where they're looking at a gel. It's like a male birth control gel, and it has a hormonal effect, right? So it has the effect of suppressing men's testosterone levels to such a degree that they don't create like sort of inseminable sperm. So it just that where they can't produce like high quality sperm, and they can't impregnate anybody with any sperm that they create. And the psychological or the side effects of this gel were very similar to what you get with the birth control pill, because essentially what you're doing in men is the exact same thing that you're doing with the birth control pill in women. And that is that you're shutting down the HPG axis, that is the hypothalamic pituitary gonadal axis, and you're preventing the release of GnRH or LHRH, as it's sometimes called. And this is the precursor hormones that lead to the production of, in women, estradiol, and in men, testosterone. And so the mechanism by which it works is very similar. And so because the birth control pill works by suppressing egg development, which then keeps estrogen levels really low. And so it's a very similar type of a mechanism. And so not surprisingly, given that the way that it's operating in terms of shutting down the HPG axis, the side effects are very similar. And they had to shut down the trials almost as soon as they started, because men were reporting such intolerable side effects that they wouldn't put up with it, and so they all dropped out. And in a lot of ways, I think that this really highlights how important the birth control issue is for women, because women, we put up with it. It's like you're in clinical trials, like when birth control pills are being tried, or when we ourselves are on hormonal birth control. It's like, how many women, I mean, I can't tell you how many conversations I've had with women who are like, oh my gosh, my birth control, like it makes me batshit crazy and I'm spotting between periods, but oh my God, I love it.
Yeah.
And the reason that our standards are so freaking low is because pregnancy prevention is so important to us. And this is one of those reasons that I think that birth control has sort of been overwhelmingly shouldered by women. And it's that for us, like, we're the ones who bear the cost of an unexpected pregnancy.
Right.
And even if we have a really amazing partner who's willing to stick with us if we end up in the case of having an unexpected pregnancy, it's our body that ends up having to pay the cost of that. And because of this, we're always going to be more motivated than men to prevent pregnancy. And this isn't to say that that's right, but that's just the way that it is. And it's because of the way that our bodies are built. And for this reason, I think that women have been able to put up with a lot more when it comes to these unpleasant, side effects with birth control. But, in another thing I'll say about this is that, for me, this really highlights the importance of trying to find a non-hormonal method of birth control that works for women or men. Because this whole idea, I mean, even like before I found out that the clinical trials were being shut down almost as soon as they started with this gel that's suppressing testosterone. I mean, what man do you know would intentionally put a gel on his body that's going to suppress his testosterone levels?
Yeah, and that
That,
sounds not. I don't think I know any guy that would be like, yeah, give me that.
yeah, that sounds amazing.
I
Like,
think I'd just be like, that sounds emasculating.
I know it's like there's like a testosterone shop on every corner, and so, yeah, that men would be willingly doing this very often is not smart. I mean, it's just like not smart thinking on people who are trying to come up with better alternatives. But I mean, I think it absolutely, if we can find something non-hormonal that's non-invasive, that works well for both men and women, like, yeah, I think that it's like we've shouldered the birth control burden for a very long time, and it would be great if our partners would be able to sort of chip in,
Yeah.
um, and be able to help play a role in terms of fertility regulation within the relationship.
Yeah. Yeah. And I feel like I have this conversation all the time with, my girlfriends. Everybody is on some form of birth control. And, a lot of my friends have recently gotten the IUD. Some friends are really happy on the pill, but everybody has like these major issues that they, some reason why they hate what they're on. But it just kind of feels like, oh, well, this is the only option. I've tried the other ones. So I guess I'm just going to stick with it. Which kind of leads me to my next question. In your professional opinion, do you have, I mean, I know we kind of talked at the beginning that you don't preach like a one size fits all prescription
Right.
for everybody because everybody's body's different, everybody's life is different and what they need. But in general, based on your research, is there one form of birth control that you think is most effective in terms of preventing conception and minimizing unintentional side effects?
Yeah, if I had an answer to this question, I would be a wealthy woman. I could ask this time, and I really wish I had a great answer. I will say this, and this is and this is like sort of interesting stuff. So, um, I like in terms of non-hormonal things, I liked and I still like, but I'm more cautious about it. I liked the copper IUD.
Okay.
I now know more than one woman who's had the little arm break off
Oh,
inside their body.
no. Oh, wow.
Yeah, and apparently there's a lawsuit because I just found out from one of my friends who had this happen to her that there's actually now a lawsuit that's going out there against this IUD because this is happening. And
This
so
is
that,
the Paragard IUD. Is that
yeah, this is the
okay?
Paragard. And I was always like, well, it's not perfect, but I think it's the least worst option.
Okay.
But now I'm like that kind nervous about it. I'm just, and again, I wouldn't say don't get the Paragard. I'm just like hearing multiple people have this situation happen is like a little bit disconcerting. And in terms of hormonal birth control, I will say this, and this is the sort of interesting piece. So I actually just had a really fantastic phone conversation with a researcher at UC Santa Barbara, and she is doing what's known as, what do they call it? It's a rich sampling methodology where they're looking at women across their menstrual cycles, and they're scanning their brains and doing hormone measures at every single day across the cycle. It's
Oh,
really cool
interesting.
research. And she found in her study where they were looking at somebody, they looked at somebody when they're naturally cycling, and then looked at somebody, the same person, when they're on the pill, and looked at their sex hormones and their brains every day of the cycle, and it's really cool. And what she found in her like research, and it's consistent with what we've been finding evidence of now in our lab, is it looks like women who are on ultra low dose pills. So this is like, I think it's zero point 0.2 micrograms of ethinyl estradiol. They and I want to corroborate this with, because we're still assaying our hormones, but the way that things are looking, these women, at least some of them, not all of them, are still experiencing a bump in estrogen right prior to when ovulation would be occurring in a natural cycle. And my guess is that if, you know, you're getting this little bump in their, and this is their own estrogen, by the way. So they're still exhibiting a little bit of this estrogen bump mid-cycle, like we get with naturally cycling women. My
Mhm.
guess is that these women probably have fewer side effects, because some of the side effects that we get, or a lot of the side effects that we get with women on hormonal birth control, are owed to the fact that women, their estrogen production is being suppressed. And estrogen is associated with a lot of the things that we like. You know, like it makes us feel more energetic. It tends to make us feel sexier. It is associated with higher levels of sexual desire. And so if we keep finding this, which, like I said, I'll know more in a couple of weeks when we finish assaying all of these hormones of the girls that we've collected in our research. If it looks like it's possible for that at least some women, or maybe it's most women, still experience a little bit of natural hormonal fluctuations while on a lower dose pill, that would probably be the thing that I would recommend. Just because my
Okay.
guess is, and although, you know, we need research on this, more research on this, more research on this, is that, you know, when women are not having their HPG axis fully suppressed and they're actually able to experience some of the naturally occurring rhythmicity, that this might be associated with fewer side effects. That's my guess. And you know, you also get this effect with women who are on the low dose hormonal IUD after they've been on it for a long time. And so like most women, their ovulation is suppressed when they're on the hormonal IUD, especially during the first year. But after like 4 years, what they find is that most women are actually cycling again. Um,
Oh, interesting.
yeah, which is interesting because, like I said, you know, a lot of the effects that we see with the birth control pill and how it influences women's psychology and all of this stuff, you know, many of those effects are because of the just suppression of a woman's own sex hormones.
Hmm. Okay, so you mentioned the IUD, and I feel like, at least in my kind of crew, this seems to be what most people are um, currently have, just because we've all done the pill and hated it and decided to try something else. And my doctor at least told me, you know, it's localized, so it shouldn't affect your brain. It shouldn't cause anxiety and depression. It shouldn't cause mood swings. Um, I mean, I'm definitely somebody that struggles with anxiety, and since I got the IUD, that certainly has not changed. It may or may not have gotten worse. Granted, we've been through a pandemic and lots of other things, so obviously many things affect a woman's body and what's going on mentally. But in terms of the IUD, I watched the hormonal happy hour you did last week, which everyone, if you want more info on the IUD, go watch Sarah's live from last week. It's really great. And you talk about the IUD a little bit in your book. But for people that don't really know much about how the IUD compares to, for example, the birth control pill, can you talk a little bit about just how the IUD affects you versus the pill and whether or not it actually is localized?
Right, yeah. So there's no such thing as a localized hormone. Hormones can't act that way. Hormones, the reason that they're so magical within the body is they have a diffuse mode of traveling. So they get into the bloodstream and then they go everywhere in the body that blood travels, and they influence every cell that blood flows to that has receptors for the hormone. And there's a lot of these cells in the brain. And so the idea that if you have a local, you know, that you have a IUD, that just because, you know, it's up near your, you know, in your cervix, that somehow by some magical process, the hormones there are only going to stay in your cervix, and potentially, you know, travel up to your ovaries, is just nuts. It's magical thinking. And so there's no such thing as a locally acting hormone. That's just not possible. And for this reason, you know, most women, when they at least during the first year that they're on the hormonal IUD, they don't ovulate. And ovulation doesn't start in the ovaries; it starts in the brain. It's initiated by the HPG axis. So the hypothalamic pituitary axis. The hypothalamus is in the brain, and that is the part of your body that kickstarts ovulation. And so, if ovulation is being suppressed, which we know that it is on the majority of women who are on the hormonal IUD, at least initially, that means that it's affecting the brain. And so, no, there's not any such thing as a locally acting hormone. Now, in terms of how it stacks up relative to the pill, like I said, there's research now that shows that after several years, if you've been on the hormonal IUD, it seems like women are like sort of overriding the HPG signal, and this probably happens because of changes in hormone receptor density, which is something that happens over time. As the body gets acclimates to more or less hormones, your body will increase or decrease the number of receptors for the hormones. And this is something that the body does to try to maintain homeostasis.
Okay.
And what's probably going on is that after women are on it for a long period of time, they adapt to those exogenous hormones, and then they just go ahead and ovulate anyway. And so we would probably find that for women who are on the hormonal IUD for a long period of time, that they start to feel more normal after a while. And my guess is that this would happen because when women start ovulating again and they're experiencing these hormonal fluctuations that are part of natural, just being a woman, generally when you're naturally cycling, that this makes women feel more at home in their own bodies. Initially, at least, and when you compare the risk of, just to throw one thing out there that I know a lot about, the risk of depression diagnosis, it actually looks like the hormonal IUD seems to be worse when you look at the developing depression after going on hormonal birth control. And they compare the hormonal IUD to different combination oral contraceptive pills. The hormonal IUD has a worse track record in terms of its links with depression. And so, and it's especially strong during the first 6 months of use, which again is consistent with the idea that when your hormones are being suppressed, that this is something that we know can have psychological side effects, and the hormonal IUD is no exception to that.
So you mentioned that some women, as their IUD ages, they do actually start ovulating again. So I apologize if this is a terribly stupid question, but if you're ovulating, does that mean you can get pregnant, or is it still preventing pregnancy?
Still preventing pregnancy. So it's really interesting because it's sort of like the Paragard IUD, which doesn't have hormones, prevents pregnancy, most likely through the effects that it has on the cervix and the uterine environment. It basically makes it inhospitable for implantation. Okay. And the hormonal IUD is no exception to this. And those low level of hormones, even though they aren't sufficient to no longer sort of shut down the full activities of the HPG axis, they do still make the cervix inhospitable for implantation. And so, so you still don't have to worry about getting pregnant. It's a great question, because it's like, oh gosh. But yeah, there's the mechanisms by which the IUD works are sort of multifold. Like, whereas with the birth control pill, it's really, the primary mechanism, although it also causes changes in the cervical fluid and other things that make conception less possible. But the primary mechanism of the pill is shutting down the HPG axis. And with the hormonal IUD, it's like shutting down the HPG axis, but also just making the cervix and the uterine environment something that's inhospitable to implantation.
Gotcha. Okay, that makes sense. So what are your thoughts on Natural Cycles? And that's like a specific brand that you listen to a thermometer, and you have an app, and you take your temperature every day and just kind of monitor whether or not you're ovulating. And it's basically just like, I mean, at least as far as I can tell, the most natural way to monitor when you may or may not be fertile. So what are your thoughts on that? Do you think that's an effective form of preventing conception, or is that not something you would recommend?
I mean, it depends on the person. I mean, honestly, which is why I don't like to make recommendations for people. I just like to give people the information. And, for this, like, yes, I think that like Natural Cycles and that sort of fertility tracking thing can be absolutely fantastic for women, because it gets you in touch with your body. So you learn about your different sort of hormonal rhythms. And I think that there's a lot of power that comes from understanding all of that.
Yeah.
Um, it is something that does require a great deal of attention, and it requires care, and it can be really tricky for women who have irregular cycles, and not every woman has a regular cycle. And you can't just solve all women's cycle problems with, like whatever herbs and spiritual dancing or whatever. Like there's like some women have really tricky cycles, and
Right.
exercise and sleep and water they drink and and everything, their cycles are still a mess. And for these women, I mean, trying to keep track of when they're fertile and when they're not fertile, and being really careful in terms of avoiding conception when it's undesirable, it can be tough. And so I think that it's an absolutely amazing way for women to regulate their fertility, as long as they are in a context, like a relationship context and a life context, where an unexpected pregnancy would not be devastating, right?
Got
Because,
it.
yeah, and
That's said.
yeah, well, I mean, if and with natural cycles, for example, if you use it correctly, it's like 98% effective, right? It's highly effective, but it requires a lot of thoughtfulness. And
Right.
so my whole sort of thought behind that is just like, if you're a woman and that you're on top of things, like, yes, absolutely, this can be something that you use. But like, would I recommend this to my teenage daughter if she became sexually active? Like, absolutely not. 'Cause, she can remember her lunch box.
Right.
So I really think that it's one of these things where, again, it's like so important for women, for all of us, to make sure that we're all educated on our options,
Yeah.
support one another in our own choices, because what's going to be the right thing for one person is unlikely to be the right thing for somebody else, and just like really try to be a source of education and support for one another, for whatever it is that's going to work the best for us.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the questions that a number of people submitted when I asked our questions was just asking about whether or not taking birth control long term affects your ability to get pregnant once you decide to go off it. Because, I have many friends. I'm 31. I have a lot of friends that have been on birth control since they were teenagers and are now getting married and starting to think about having a family, and are worried that since they've been on the pill for 10 plus years, that that's going to affect their ability to conceive. So is that something that is warranted, or is there no evidence to suggest that that's something to be worried about?
Yeah, I mean, right now, with what the research suggests, is that there's not any evidence that suggests that that's something to be worried about.
Okay.
I know that women who are on hormonal birth control, like, they tend to have children later on in life. And that is something that we know is associated with difficulty, greater difficulty in conception.
Yeah.
Back in our great grandparents' day and our grandparents' day, I mean, most women were pregnant, whether they wanted to be or not, by the time they were 25.
Right.
Fertility is it's cruel, because it's like it starts to decline in your late 20s, early 30s. I mean, it's already declining, and most women just feel like they're finally getting their shit together, and their fertility is declining. What? And so it's
It's not
terrible.
fair.
Oh, it just seems terrible. Well, it's terrible. Well, anyway, it's not terribly dire. It's a fact of life, and then we have to
Right.
be here. And so, like, I think that, so yes, the pill can be associated with difficulty conceiving, in as much as women are able to delay their childbearing. There
Okay.
isn't evidence that suggests that women who are ever users of birth control pills versus never users, that they have any differences in the rate of infertility and other things like that. And so even if you were on the pill for a long time, you can feel pretty confident, at least based on the existing literature, that it didn't influence your fertility. I do think that there are still questions that we need to answer. Like, so just to give you some ideas of things that I haven't seen addressed enough in the literature, and I'd really love to see being raised in terms of research content, is the length of time thing that you mentioned is really interesting. I have not seen anything that has really looked at that in a thoughtful way, like where it's looking at like duration in a way that to me would be something that, and let me just hasten to add that I don't think that even if you were on the birth control pill for a long time, that it would affect your fertility long term. I just think that it is possible that it could take longer for you to recover, like to rebound, if
Mhm.
that makes sense.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, and the other question, the other one that I really want to see handled in a thoughtful way, and I haven't, and this one I actually really wonder about, and that is like girls who go on it during adolescence. And
Okay.
so girls who go on birth control pills when they're like 12, 13, 14, 15, 16,
Oh
17.
wow, yeah, that's really young.
Yeah, well, I know. Well, some girls go on it as soon as they get their periods,
Yeah.
because doctors put them on it to clear up their skin or to regulate their cycle. And when you have these girls who've been on it since they were, during the pubertal transition, when their brain is still developing, their HPG axis is still developing. I have not seen research that's really addressed this issue specifically in terms
Okay.
of fertility, and I would just be really interested in getting a better handle on that also. And so, I mean, I think that there's a lot of questions with respect to fertility and pill use that still need to be answered. And so, I don't think that the jury, like, I don't think that this is an ironclad case. Like, no, the pill cannot, under any circumstances, affect fertility, because I don't think that that's probably true. I think that there probably are some contexts in which the pill, like for whatever reason, whether it's the timing of use or whatever, can potentially harm fertility, but like whether that's long term or whether that's actually true at all, we need
Mhm.
to have more research on. So my answer right now is like, I don't think women should get alarmed by it and assume that their fertility, because the big studies do show no differences, right?
Okay.
And
That's good
that's
to know.
just that the overwhelming effect is that there's no effect,
Mhm.
right? But that there might be some cases where it's like, oh, well, women who went on when they're 13, if we just look at those women, they do have a longer time, to get pregnant or whatever. And so I want to see some more of that before I like definitively say like, absolutely no, there's no way it impacts fertility.
Okay, that's good to know. Yeah, I mean, I feel like one of my biggest takeaways from your book was just that we need more research on all these things we're talking about, and just that the fact that it's birth control is taken by women, there's just not enough research. And I mean, I feel like you talk about in your book how there's all these studies on like Viagra and like things that men can do for like sexual issues, and yet like women are the ones preventing pregnancy and or carrying a baby, and like there's just not enough research on how these things affect us. But that leads me to my next question. So the other thing that a lot of people asked about was kind of switching gears a little bit, just about the COVID-19 vaccine. And I mean, I think it's really important first off to say that all doctors are recommending the COVID-19 vaccine, even to pregnant women. However, a lot of people are wondering if there's anything they need to be aware of in terms of the COVID-19 vaccine affecting fertility, and or if it's not fertility, if there's anything that women of childbearing ages need to be aware of if they are choosing to get the vaccine.
Yeah, and so this is an interesting question. Like, so let me say that, I think that the things that we've been hearing about in the news media with women having their periods getting messed up, like whether their periods are coming early or they're coming later and they're really heavy, I think that these things can possibly be influenced by the vaccine,
Okay.
but not like in the way that we might think. So, what happens when we get a vaccine is our body undergoes an immunological response, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this is a very natural thing, right? And immune responses are things that we've been having as a species since the time, we originated, right? We have immune protect us against illnesses. And yeah, and immune responses happen. And getting a vaccine does cause an immunological response. When your body is experiencing an immunological response, this is a form of stress on the body. And essentially, what it's telling the rest of the body when you're having this going on is one of the things it's telling the body is like, this is probably not an amazing time to have a baby. Like, like I am sick, right? Because when your immune system is going crazy, it usually means that you're sick. So this is like your body is sort of potentially influencing the activities of the HPG axis to ditch that cycle and then wait until things are better. And we know from a ton of research on women and cycles and stress is that stressors of every kind, whether it's psychosocial stressors or if it's immunological stressors, stressors of any kind will mess up the cycle. And this is because the cycle is super sensitive to whether or not conditions are wise for pregnancy, right? And so if a woman is feeling not like she's socially supported, if she's feeling socially isolated, if she's feeling just extreme stress or experiencing an immunological event, all of these things, especially when they're going on very early on in a pregnancy, which I'm considering like a cycle before it's even conceptive in this case, like your body's sort of preparing for a pregnancy. If your body is getting these signals that like you're really sick right now or you have no social support, a lot of times you'll actually disrupt your current cycle, and then and you either won't even ovulate and you'll just like have a bleed, or you'll ovulate and ditch the cycle, or you'll miscarry. And there's a lot of research showing this with other forms of stress. I have, and even immunological stress. So I have no doubt that that yes, there are women who are getting the vaccine and are absolutely having weird things happening with their cycle. I think that it's a very natural thing that's happening. So I've had my vaccine. I'm not at all concerned about that. Immunological events are immunological events. For me in particular, because I'm not trying to have a baby, this is something that doesn't really faze me. If I was somebody who is about to do a round of IVF, I would hold off on the vaccine until I was a little bit further along in the pregnancy than that. And even if I was trying to conceive, I would at least be like considering like, okay, is, if I'm having this immunological event, like there's a chance that my body is not like this current cycle isn't going to take, my body's going to ditch this cycle and wait until I'm healthier, to allow ovulation to occur and allow, an egg to become inseminated and an implant. So, I think that it's definitely something, that can happen. And it actually makes a lot of sense, but I don't think that there's any long-term effects on this. I don't think that, the vaccine is like ruining women's cycles or like ruining women's ovulate or anything like that. It's temporary. And I think I saw a question pop up about the length of time. A lot of times when our body undergoes a major stressor, and if it's influencing our fertility, it's usually a one-shot deal. So it'll be one cycle. Sometimes it can be a couple of cycles. Okay. So for some women, and again, it's one of these things. It depends on how intensely the body registered it as a stress. But generally within 1 to 3 cycles. I would say for most women, it's going to be within the course of 1 cycle. For some women, it could potentially be like up to maybe 3 is what I would say. If you're still having weird cycles after that, it's probably something else that's happening that just happened to coincide with the timing of the vaccine. And I would definitely talk to the doctor about that. Because, if it's continuing like that for a long time, I'm definitely get it checked out.
Okay, well, that's really great info. So basically, just to summarize, if you are currently trying to get pregnant, like immediately, and or doing IVF, maybe talk to your doctor or hold off on getting the vaccine because it can affect 1 to 3 cycles, but there are no long-term effects, correct?
Yeah. There's not research on this. So like, let me just say that I can't say with, ironclad certainty. I feel pretty confident about this, because it looks an awful lot like any other immunological stressor. And the thing is that our bodies are super duper sensitive to stress, and our cycles are super duper sensitive to stress. And the reason for this is pregnancy is a big fucking deal. Our body is like not going to screw around with that. It's not going to make that big, huge investment if, right out the bat, like why, if you ovulate once every month, which most women do, why would you choose right now when your body is sick and undergoing an immunological response? Why would you choose right now to allow an egg to implant? It just doesn't make sense. The body's like, no way, Jose. Like, I'll wait till next time very much when I'm feeling better. Because the immune system, I mean, it influences fetal development, and there's a ton of research on this stuff too. And so the idea of, you know, allowing that to go on when you could just wait another cycle is cuckoo. The body
Yeah.
would, and so that's what's going on. I don't think I think women need to you know, feel confident that they're, if they choose to get the vaccine, that they're doing so in a way that isn't going to be harmful to their fertility.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I already got both my Moderna shots, so you know I'm in it for better or for worse.
Yeah.
But I'm really, I mean, I certainly did my research beforehand, and I feel I was actually in a vaccine trial before I got Moderna, in the AstraZeneca trial, and I mean, I have many family friends that are doctors, and everyone assured me that you need to get the vaccine, and any potential side effects are far worse if you actually got COVID-19 versus if you get the vaccine. So that was, you know, enough for me. But just wanted to ask, since a number of people did submit that question. So really the only other thing I have here is I'm just so curious to know what's next for you. Are you going to write another book? Are you doing any new exciting research, or what's kind of next on your agenda?
I love that. So I am working on another book, and I would love to tell you what it is, but I'm torn between two proposals right now. I will let you all know as soon as I know for certain which one I'm going to land on. But I'm also working on starting a business that does cycle mapping, and so we're going to
Oh, wow.
be sending women kits that gives them the materials that they need to collect saliva samples every other day over the course of their cycle, and then asking them about their psychological states through an app. And then we're going to map
Oh,
their, so we can show women what their sex hormones look like over the course of an entire cycle, and then also be able to give them sort of feedback on their own personal sort of mind-body signature, and that is the links between their sex hormones and how they feel. So what is their relationship between estrogen and energy level, and what's the, you know, progesterone and mood, and estrogen and sexual desire, and sort of providing women a like a complete mind-body signature.
wait, that's so cool. If you need some extra guinea pigs, let me know.
Absolutely, I'll let you know.
Uh,
We're going to be doing pre-sales of kits on Kickstarter in
oh,
September.
cool. Awesome. Well, yeah, you'll have to send me the details so I can like post about it and tell people to
Yeah,
go.
no, absolutely, absolutely, love it.
That's awesome. Well, Sarah, thank you so much for joining me. I don't want to take up your whole evening, but this has been so informative and educational, and you've answered so many of my questions. And I'll be sure to save this to IGTV, so anybody that couldn't join us can watch it later. And yeah, this has been amazing. It's so great to meet you. And like I said, loved your book. Everybody go buy it.
Thank you, and thanks for having me. For fun.
Of course, yeah, and I can't wait to see what you do next. If and when you do publish your next book, be sure to let me know, and I will absolutely go buy it.
All right, awesome, great. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks,
Bye.
Sarah. Have a good evening.
You too.